more of a core reason why you don't get representation. So as a negative, people would argue that term limits aren't going to solve the problem of getting more representation. It's actually redistricting. Also, how many people are familiar with the idea of lobbies? How many of you understand what the word lobby means in government? Have you heard of lobbyist or lobbies at all? Any of you guys in general? So, you ever watch movies and they have people that ask for funding in like movies? They're like a big military company and they get the military guys to come over and they have a big party for them and they try to, like in Iron Man, for example, he tries to show them all the bombs and his weapons, and then in Iron Man 2, Justin Hammer basically shows all his cool weapons and everything. They try to do these things, right? Those guys are spending millions of dollars to support certain legislatures. Why?
So they can get more funding.
Because if I help you get elected, what are you going to do for me?
Money.
You're going to help me get projects, right?
Yeah.
So lobbying is actually considered a very big reason why people don't have a lot of voice, because lobbyists, do you know the percentage of people that actually believe in gun control in America? Does anyone ever guess how many people believe that gun control is okay? 78, 75, something like that. 75% of Americans are actually okay with rules on guns.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how hard it is to get any rule on guns passed in America? Because the lobby that fights it is the NRA. It is one of the most well-funded lobbies. So even though they don't represent the majority opinion, they have fought any restriction on guns. The guns for people like that had committed spousal abuse, NRA went against it. People that have mental illness, NRA said that wasn't supposed to be done.
Question, not sure all of them know NRA.
National Rifle Association. The NRA is considered to be one of the most powerful lobbies in America. Not because they represent America's voice, because I just told you like 60-70% of people are cool with some kind of form of restrictions, right? But because there's so much money coming from the gun companies, they fight everything. So America has had trouble passing any form of gun control, right? Any kind of rules. Any rules is very difficult to pass on guns. And in fact, rules that previously existed have come off the books.
Another question, are the lobbyists already the elected ones or not necessarily?
So it's an incestuous relationship about lobbyists. Sometimes former congressmen become lobbyists because they know the congress people. They know how to go to the parties. They know where they go, and they go talk to these people, right? But sometimes it's the people, they just send in money, right? And they are pouring in money for campaigns for certain candidates, right? And based on the candidates that win, certain legislation tends to take power, right? So for example, there are pro-union lobbies, right, that support unions, right? So then those legislatures will tend to favor things that give workers rights, right? That the unions support, right? Now there's some people who come from states that are against, let's say, restrictions on reducing our coal consumption. So there's a Democrat who's in Congress right now who does not support any effort to curtail climate control measures because his state is one of the leading producers of coal. So it would hurt his state, right? And he gets lots of money from the coal lobbies, right? But a lot of people in America do support some measures to try to control our environment, right? But when there's lobbies and money, and it doesn't take now, how many people participate in an actual election in America?
40%.
No. Our U.S. presidency, how many people you think? What percentage? Not people, percentage.
10%.
10%. And that was considered one of the highest ever elections. The last two elections were considered the highest, and we had 10% of the people vote only. So who makes the decisions? It's a small, motivated group of people who are voting and lobbies. And the Supreme and the Russians. And so this is all related to this stuff about influencing the elections, right? So will term limits, why are term limits justified? You said diversity.
Yeah.
So is diversity would you say it's a value or is it a criterion?
I would say it can be a value.
Okay, but is it better as a criterion or as a value in your opinion? And if it's the criterion, what would the value be? because your argument was that it encourages diversity, right? More representation, new ideas, right? Different
Yeah.
people. So tell me an example of a value that would go with that argument.
Equal rights for all.
Equality.
Yeah.
Equality is a good one. Representative democracy.
Yeah.
You all threw out democracy is pretty good, right?
Mhm.
So those are all could be values in a case that you'd make,
Mhm.
right? So if you're to make a case, you're arguing equality, right? We all value equality. We value democracy. We all value, right to participate, right? We don't want to be authoritarian, right? These could be values you had, right? Now, to have equality or democracy, your criterion might be through egalitarianism. Egalitarian means that everyone is allowed to participate. An egalitarian society is one where people are participating, thereby encouraging diversity, right? Because everyone is allowed to participate. It is not participation by the few, it's participation of the many. Does that make sense? So a fancier word for the criterion in that example would be egalitarianism, would be the criterion to support diversity. And it's good for you to use that because you got to remember there are going to be some judges with biases to those terms like diversity and stuff like that you have to be very careful that their biases will leak out into their judging, right? So it's better to use the larger scientific term egalitarianism or philosophical term egalitarianism because it sounds very, diversity has connotations, right?
Could you put that word on the board? Thank you.
On this article, it also says that preventing corruption is also one of them. Preventing corruption.
Yes, preventing corruption. How? Why? That's a very good argument. Tell me why incumbency leads to corruption in your opinion.
Well, it says that on the article, I don't really know anything about this, but many experts believe that politicians have a tendency to grow more corrupt as they spend more time in office.
What's a famous saying that kind of you've heard?
Power corrupts.
An absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
Mhm.
So, corruption. So I will tell you in business that, people commit frauds or they steal from business all the time, right? You hear about these stories where people steal. You know how those people steal from their businesses? They never take a day off. Because if you're stealing from your company, however you're doing it, you have to be there to make sure no one catches you, right? So you never take a day off because you're always making sure that the people don't. And because what happens when you take a day off in your job and you've been stealing from your company? Somebody else is going to do your job. That person's going to look at you, what you're doing, and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand why this big thing over here has got a bunch of sticky notes saying, I owe you. Right? They're not supposed to have that, right? So then the fraud or the deception gets caught much earlier, right? So one of the things you learn in fraud in business is when you have an employee who refuses to take a day off, that's why companies build HR policies, and this is just general business knowledge for you guys, that says you use or lose your vacation. Because they want you to take your vacation. Because if you take your vacation, you are more likely, if you are doing something wrong, to get caught. You ever been to an ice cream store and they say, if we don't give you a receipt, ring the bell and tell everybody and you get a free ice cream cone? They have it in all the ice cream stores typically. Ring the bell, or if you don't get a receipt from us, let us know and we'll give you a free ice cream. Do you know why they do that? Because a very common way to steal from an ice cream store is to take the amount of money you would have spent and put it in your pocket and not in the register. Because when you run it through the register, the tape goes through, right? So they want you to take the tape off and get your receipt because then they know the sale went through the register.
I've never seen that.
You go to a marble slab and you go to some other places, they'll say that a lot of times. Just if you ever pay attention, you're probably not thinking about it because it's not that big a deal. Most places do it. But if you read on small corners, a lot of small stores, they'll say, if we don't give you a receipt, tell the manager. Get a free ice cream, get a free drink. For you, you don't think it's a big deal. You're like, great, free drink. But there's a deeper meaning to the policy. It's to actually catch people stealing from the company. Right? So, corruption is because you're constantly on the job, right? If the congressman is there, they can keep making sure the money goes to their friends, right?
Is it okay if I touch my computer?
Of course. I mean, as long as it's MIMS allowed, I'm okay with it, right? I'm just here to help you guys with this stuff, right? So corruption, when you have forced change, it's hard to sustain a long-term corruption, right? Because the actors are changing, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's another good reason for pro-term limits, right? Corruption would support the now, would corruption would also be anti-democratic because all the people are not participating. Some people are getting extra benefits, right? Usually, right? So you could rephrase corruption to be the corruption in politics limits everyone's benefit of the government's resources, right? So if we're in an egalitarian society that supports democracy, everyone should have a right to participate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it shouldn't be that only certain people get money, get programs, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good argument for term limits. What else is there as a reason for term limits? We have to get good at this because you have to make in your. So I'm going to give you. This is what's going to happen for you guys. You have to have an introduction in a 1AC. So you're going to come up with an introduction. An introduction can be a quote, a story, whatever you want, right? It could be like, George Washington once stood and was about to leave Mount Vernon, and when he was leaving, he penned a very famous paper that he sent to the New York Times. It was George Washington's farewell address to the country. In that farewell, George Washington specifically stated that he was afraid of the party system, and the party system would eventually destroy America. And he said we should not support parties, but we should curtail it, because parties become corrupt, and they stop working for the American people. And I agree with George Washington. He says, so therefore, I stand firmly resolved that term limits by members of the U.S. Congress are justified.
But you just read that over 6 minutes.
No, but I just did the introduction. To help you, I'm going to, so then after you do the introduction, you typically state the resolution, right? And you might actually read the quote. So underneath the introduction, where I said the thing, as quoted by the New York Times article that was published from George Washington, blah, 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 and you read the paragraph where he talks about it, right? So I gave you a tagline at the top, and then I give you the thing, right? Then I would say, here's the resolution that I stand firmly resolved. Then I would say, to help this debate, I'm going to define key terms. In this is a really short resolution, right? So what do you think the key terms to define in this debate are? What's the resolution? Make sure everybody knows that, right? You guys are debating next week. So everybody got to know that.
Members of the United States Congress are justified.
Term limits for the members of the United States Congress are justified. So what are the key terms?
Term limits, United States Congress, and justified. And members.
Okay.
By the way, what's the speaking speed? Is it different from public
So
forum, or-
I will tell you that if you are speaking, you have to really be able to weigh your judges. If your judge by default looks my age or older, assume they don't know, they've never been debating. Okay? Because the average person my age is not debated, they're just doing it to help their kids, right? So, don't go fast. Stay very oratorial when you speak to them. They will be more persuaded with that. If it's some young 20 or this person doesn't have a teacher in the speech, you may have a shot that they may actually know debate, right? Because that's why they're participating, right?
What if they're one of the very old judges?
Look, you have a better shot with me but how are you going to figure that out? By sizing them up. In your 10 seconds in the round before then, unless you have a long conversation, you're going to have very limited due diligence on this guy, right? Or lady, right?
I mean, I think our third judge said that he was a former Lincoln Douglas debate.
Good. So then you have a shot. But I'll be very honest. I haven't flowed properly in probably 15 years, 10 years. I can do it, but I'm rusty. I'm pretty sure I can keep up with you guys, but I couldn't keep up with like college debaters anymore because the speed is much higher, right? So you probably have a shot if they told you that. Then you can go faster. But for this tournament, if you can, you want to go faster because you have more to say.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're gonna have so much research in the next week that you're gonna have too much to say?
Probably not. No.
So what my suggestion is, let's be real about winning now. I want you to win even if we're gonna go in like a little bit short-handed. Don't go in trying to win because you have out-evidenced them. Go in because you are more logical than them, right? Your speaking skills on this topic will be higher than theirs. That's what we have to practice on right now. That's why I'm asking you to give me examples in real life. Are you raising your hand or are you stretching?
I'm raising
Okay.
my hand.
Go ahead.
Is it like a one-on-one?
Yes, Lincoln Douglas, so make sure, unlike public forum, Lincoln Douglas is one-on-one.
Oh, is there crossfire or
Cross-ex, yes.
Cross-examination.
So I will give you tips in cross-examination. One, do not come off arrogant or rude. It is a very common thing for people to be like, are you sure? I mean, I don't think so. Like, don't do that. Try to ask, just to clarify, what did you mean by that, right? Sometimes you can walk people into your examples that you're gonna give them your negative. If you flip it, so you said that diversity is important, right? So if diversity, and this is a perfect example. I'm gonna give you a tip for this cross-examination. A lot of people are gonna pick term limits and diversity as a common contention. It's a very common one if you read it, right? We agree? Most of you guys told me that, and I heard you guys say, oh, more people, more chances to see new people, right? So this is my cross-examination of your contention, right? So Nathaniel, you told us that diversity is a really important idea. Why is it so important? Go ahead, can you explain that to me?
The diversity can bring in more ideas. It can it can bring in new thoughts and on certain ideas or ideals.
So you would agree with me that if whoever wins this round, the real goal is to get more diversity then, right? That's what you're proposing, right?
I'm proposing that new people would come in.
New people, but
New people
diversity,
with different ideas.
but different backgrounds, you said, right?
Yeah.
Different backgrounds, right? So whatever system supports different people having a voice in Congress is the better system. Is that right?
I suppose so.
Good. So I just want to be clear that if I am able to show you, Judge, or Nathaniel, that actually diversity gets hurt by term limits, then your contention goes my way, right? By your logic.
That's only if you want.
I'm not. But if I'm able to prove to the judge that actually diversity is hurt with term limits, does this all-important idea go my way?
No.
Why? You just said that if more people of different backgrounds are the end result. Like as I said, I was very clear. You said different backgrounds, right? Different backgrounds is for the ideas, but
I never said different backgrounds.
Yes, you did.
okay,
said
no,
different ideas.
okay, fine. So now you're saying only different ideas.
Yeah, different ideas.
So not different backgrounds.
They would have to have different thoughts.
So
Yes.
so there is no relation to diversity. So you're only saying diversity of ideas, not actually of people.
Of people, yes.
So then you're saying
So,
backwards.
so no, but okay. So are you just literally saying a different human being, or when we use the common term diversity in America, are we just talking about there's actually 5 different people standing in line, or is it 5 different types of people that have come from different backgrounds?
5 different people who have come from different backgrounds and have different ideas.
Fine. So, but the background has to be different, right?
In some cases, yes.
Good. Thank you. I end my cross-examination. So my first negative speech, I will be talking about the order of a negative speech at that point in the constructive is to spend 3 to 4 minutes presenting your negative case, and then but you might attack the other person. So if I was doing negative constructive, before I start my negative constructive speech, I would like to go over the facts of the affirmative position. The affirmative has stated that diversity, the idea of people from different backgrounds, will have different ideas. And I specifically asked, before I got to this point, I asked Nathaniel earlier, what did you mean by diversity? And he goes, different backgrounds, different things. And he gave me the example that, we talked about how, people who come from families with a lot of guns or whatever, right? And we talked about kids from different countries have different backgrounds. That's why we have MIMS, right? So that's what we talked about. So if I can show your judge that diversity actually is hurt by term limits, then you have to vote negative. Because as a judge, you have to see, it's his argument. I'm going to show you other reasons to keep term limits against term limits, but if I take his argument and make it actually turn the other way, why wouldn't you vote negative? You will find in literature that people who support diversity sometimes say term limits actually hurts them. Why? This is a question. We're now out of the debate world. I'm going to ask you that question now. Why do you think people say diversity is actually hurt with term limits?
Okay, so term limits hurt diversity.
Yes, there is evidence that indicates that term limits hurts diversity. Why do you think that might be the case?
Because of things like lobbying and things like that, which will just bring in more of the same idea. Or
That's why their ideas can be different, but I'm asking, why does it hurt diversity? Not of the ideas, but the actual people.
because people won't vote for people who are in different
So
positions.
there are studies done by political scientists that says that when a woman wins elected office, 70-something percent of the time she will lose
So next
the following election sometimes, there's some large percentage. Much higher rate of loss, right? So
at a point, did you say that going directly against your other percentage that's saying 85% of the time you win?
win, but women are actually very low as representation, right? We just only have 26% based on the last election, right? Historically in America, incumbency, so you're right, but incumbency tends to favor white males. So as the system stays white, it won't change.
So this woman example is regardless it's termed or not termed, right?
Yeah, they tend to lose because, let me clarify the example a little bit clearer. Because what happens is that, so the incumbent will win. So the incumbent wins, but you know when you force somebody to leave the position, the next person to be reelected being a woman is actually 76%. So let me take a step back. Like the next candidate that wins after the woman on the term election, it tends to be a 76% loss rate that if a woman comes back in. It's a much higher than if it's a man.
And Richards was only the governor of Texas for 4 years.
But you see what I'm saying? So you're right. The incumbency, there might be similar, right? If they're just incumbent, but when you force the woman to leave, right? The next candidate, the open election for that position between parties, right? The odds of re-electing this minority or woman candidate is actually lower statistically.
Because they've already seen like the
There is a bias against the candidate, right? That has nothing to do with their performance sometimes. So there's a backlash occurring. So that makes it harder on the next woman who runs. We can't elect another woman. She gave us problems. Women gave us problems. So sometimes they backlash against the gender or the race. Does that make sense? So there's political scientists that actually say that diversity is hurt because sometimes when they win the position, they can stay because of incumbency. But when they're forced out, their successor doesn't always have the same success rate.
But couldn't someone just be forced out a different way? Like
If you're like impeached, but theoretically because there's no term limits in Congress.
through threats or something like that. Like literally forced out. It's not
Yeah, but outside of violence, the political process is that if the incumbent wants to run, they win, right?
Didn't someone just get forced out of the Supreme Court in that scenario where someone was literally forced out of there, not impeached, but like threatened and pushed out by the public? So when
You mean one of the nominees didn't want to submit for as a nominee?
no, they were like in the position for several years, and the public pushed them out of the position.
I'm not familiar with the Supreme Court justice that was recently done that way. I'm not. Most of the Supreme Court justices, they leave because they die. Yeah, they die.
Or they retire.
They retire or they die. It's a lifetime position. So I'm not. But I know nominees who didn't want to go forth in the nomination process because they were afraid of going through the nomination process. But I'm not sure what you're saying in the example. So anyway, so now that we've talked about this, so then you have the definition of key terms. You guys had term limits. Another key term that will be in this thing is U.S. Members of the U.S. Congress, right? And the only reason this is important is because as a debater, you can use this term to prevent people from bringing examples from other countries. If you limit, my handwriting is really poor, but members of U.S. Congress, whatever the resolution says, right? Okay? Is a key term. If you can use that term, you could argue that it limits the validity of comparing against other forms of government and other levels of government. Like if they bring statistical or empirical data about state elections or city council elections or elections in Europe, right? It's irrelevant. The data should be focused off of the results of the U.S. Congress. This will help you guys because you only have a week. If you can make sure all your articles talk about U.S. Congress results, you can limit out all these other examples. Are you guys struggling with my handwriting? Yeah, it was members of U.S. Congress, sorry. Whatever the resolution says, I'm sorry.
Members of the United
United States Congress, sorry. United States. Yeah, United States Congress, sorry. I'm left-handed, so I have to be very careful. My handwriting goes smears over this thing. So you can use definitionally this to limit out the value of anecdotal evidence from other countries. So if I were you guys, when you're debating someone, if you can limit the debate to things about the U.S. Congress, it will help you because you don't have a lot of time to research, right? So as one of the ways you can limit it is if you get the key definition, you can say members of the U.S. Congress and of our form of government, and if they concede that, which I assume most people will concede because most people don't like to debate terms, right? You could argue that in this debate, Your Honor, your Judge, you should really limit the value of comparing the British form of government, the parliamentary system, to the U.S. Congress on studies because it's a different it's a different historical system.
Oh, in your rebuttal?
In your arguments, you're constructive. Or your rebuttal if you're affirmative.
You won't know.
Yes, if you're 1AR, yes, yeah. In your constructive, if you leave this term out there in your thing, so that in your rebuttal, you can use it as an argument against your opponents who may have all these examples of other countries, right? In their actual evidence they're quoting you. Does that make sense? So strategically, that term can moot out evidence that they're bringing up, talking about German studies, about the German parliamentary system. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be watching for that when you're in cross-examination. Like if they say something like this study that you mentioned, what country did that take place in? Oh, it was a study, it was an Australian study. So does Australia have the exact same kind of governmental setup as we do?
Yeah.
And so I just want to be clear. So this is not a U.S. study that you quoted, but it's actually an Australian study. All right.
There was a resolution.
No. You don't make the argument in constructives.
Oh, I don't.
You use it to set up your speech the next time you get up. I want to be very clear that this debate, since they conceded the term members of the United States Congress, and has not been defined, that the debate that we have today should focus on the terms and evidence based on U.S. Congress. That if we're going to debate the value and the criterion today, we should be focusing on evidence that implicates the results of our system. Does that make sense? It will be a way, because you guys don't have a ton of time to research. So all you have to do is just read their evidence and say, well, let's talk about Australia. This is talking about Japan. Because there's a lot of political science that people will be pulling up, right? Some of their studies could be helpful or hurtful to your arguments, right? So if you can at least moot them by saying that they're not relevant because of the definition of the resolution, at least that's an argument you have, right? In this debate, you guys are going to come in outmanned and undergunned, right? So you have to scrap. So you have to scrap with strategy. Like understanding how to define the terms, right? Like the small argument. Taking common ideas of diversity, using your CX to lead to your argument. Techniques that aren't usually done very well by debaters. Most debaters are like, well, you're wrong. I'm going to prove to you, okay? I'm going to win this next round, okay? I want to get up here and beat you guys. And they're just arguing. I don't care. Prove it in the speech. Use your CX
I thought we
to...
didn't have a CX penalty.
You do. You have cross-examinations between all your constructives. So there will be a cross-examination between the first affirmative and the negative, where you can ask clarification questions. And it's 3 minutes.
Examinations between rebuttals?
No. Just your constructives. It's just to clarify the arguments. Now the point of a rebuttal, and you got to realize this, is that you are going to, and this is a skill. This is another area we could work on. It is a skill that you have to balance out their arguments and your arguments. Does that make sense? Most new debaters struggle in attacking their opponent's arguments. If you can, and the reason why they struggle with it is, how many of you know how to take notes in a debate?
Flow.
Flow? Yes. How many of you feel like you're pretty decent at flowing? Do you guys have flows from your last debates in any of your stuff?
It was on paper.
Sure. Do you have it on paper or do you have it
It's probably like
shredded?
at where we took the.
Give me some tips, like,
we lost.
so tell me some things that you guys learned in flowing that were given to you as tips for flowing.
Don't say entire long words, just some, like, use abbreviations for them, summarize,
How'd you abbreviate?
just like for Texas, TX, for countries, like their initials, for, words that you know well that are, used in this topic, you just have an abbreviation for the name.
Okay, so for example, what is, so that's a good point, so I did one here, cause I'm out of habit. When people say something is key, I used to use this, K with a circle. When people say with, W/, without, W/O. When I did no.
I think no is a pretty small word, I think. Probably.
I know, but I used to do that, you're right, this is stuff we did. I would skip vowels in some of the words. I would just do the consonants to get faster at writing, right? Then if I said greater, or less than, I would use a symbol, right? You're gonna hear that with debaters because they're gonna try to give you arguments that they're in their taglines, because you're flowing the tagline, right? Theoretically, the tagline should be regurgitating what the evidence is gonna say below it, right? So you're gonna flow the tagline enough to where you can keep up with them. So use these kind of things, right? Did you guys use multiple colors or did you use one color during your debates?
One.
You should use multiple colors if you can.
I don't have multiple.
You can have a pen that has multiple, like multiple inks in it, like you pulled out, you click it in one ink color.
I don't know.
You can buy them at Walmart or
Or you
Walgreens.
can just buy two color, like a red and a black.
Yeah, or you can buy a red and black if you really want to. The reason why is that when you're flowing, you try to keep your paper split between the speeches, right?
Oh, do you need these?
Yeah, that's one easy one if you just want to switch pen, you know what I'm saying? And then what you do is you write your flow here, you're writing all the arguments here, and then as a mental tool, if you switch the color when you're writing your notes, you will see it easier on the paper.
Or like what they said, what you're gonna say to rebut that.
Yeah, because you can write your notes down during your prep time, right? I will tell you that you want to use all of your CX time. Because use it to get your thoughts, like while you're asking questions, just formulate your thoughts in the background.
Okay.
If you can, multitask in your brain about that.
4 minutes.
4 minutes, not 3 minutes?
I think it's 3 minutes for this CX, but I gotta double check.
No, I mean prep time.
Prep time is 4 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, 4 minutes. But you do not want to use your prep time
At the very beginning?
well, first of all, constructive, you should never use it.
Yeah.
Like, if you're negative, you're going to have to, because you're gonna have to take a few minutes to get your thoughts together. So if you're negative, you're going to want to use some prep time, right? But you want to limit it by using your CX to ask questions that are giving you a moment to just get your thoughts together, right? Just try your best to not make yourself look like you're completely a moron. Be like, can you tell me what you meant by bigger? Don't did you tell me what Texas meant in that sentence? Don't ask like weird questions like that. Don't like walk into that. But you don't want because you don't want to be like, well, Texas is this big place, and make you look dumb. But you want to be able to successfully take up the 4 minutes of your thinking, because it's going to feel like that 4 minutes when I turn the timer on for prep time, you're going to feel panicky, right? So you cut the panic down because you use your CX in the background, because even if they tell you an argument, so they said, for example, like we talked about Australia, right? So, and I told you the thing about diversity, how I'm going to attack diversity, right? I'm going to prep against the common articles right now. That's why I'm having you to write the reasons down. What are the common reasons people give for term limits, right? So that we can have both sides of the debate. And then what you do is you pre-write out your answers, and they're called blocks, right? And then when they said diversity is really important, and you walk them into that thing saying, so I turn diversity, actually it's hurt, you lose the debate, right?
Well, that's only if that's
I understand. I'm not going back to rehash the whole thing. I'm just saying that if I get you, that whole conversation we're having,
Yeah.
the other part of it I'm using is that now I have this already blocked out thing about how I'm going to turn diversity, right? So I can then get my brain around that fact that go pull that block out. And then I can argue it, right? I'm using the CX time to get my thoughts together, right? So if you can prep on these common concepts like diversity, corruption, you should write out, does it really solve it or not?
Okay.
Because if you're affirmative, the pros. If you're negative, is it true or not?
I have one question. In our previous debate, we weren't allowed to be on the internet. Like,
You're not allowed to be on the internet on this.
So how are we supposed to like put all these locks on something?
Print it out, or you can just.
So, you see, like, this is an interesting thing for me. When we did it, I used to have file folders and tubs of just evidence that I used to have. Just like, I had entire things of like, I had 5 of them when I used to walk in a debate round. And they were just full of evidence, right? So, this whole debating with laptops is like completely a little foreign to me, but theoretically, as long as you're not on the internet and you've saved the documents onto your computer, you can retrieve them on your hard drive. You cannot use the internet. So if you download the article and have them there as a PDF or saved as a PDF, then you're able to access them. But you don't want to have the whole article. You don't want to have, you want to have the whole article so that like if a judge questions the validity of it, you can show them, right?
Are judges allowed to do that?
Yes.
I've always been told that they have to believe what you say or something like that.
They do, but in theory, if I challenge that, I think like in my history, in 1 year, somebody challenged, somebody made up a card because somebody made up a piece of evidence and they pulled out the article and showed them that this is wrong. And the debater got busted for typing out something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't happen very often, but judges or people are allowed to. But in theory, if a challenge ever happens to it, that's the whole point of it. It's not done often. You should be ethically sound enough to not fudge those lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you want to have the original article, but you want to actually prep them. Have them into blocks. Like, what arguments are you going to be using? Right? So, we talked about diversity and corruption. Is there anything else that you could think of as a reason for pro-term limits?
Yeah, why is it for most
Huh?
article? I'm reading the article right
And it's okay if you don't, but just be ready that somebody else might have an argument, right? So that's why you need to open your brain up. Even if you're not competing, what's the reason term limits are good? Oh, the other word that's going to be here that you guys should is justified.
Mm-hmm.
What does justified mean?
now. Changing the behavior of people who are elected.
Is that a definition or is that you?
That's one of the things that they have in the article.
Okay, but look up the definition of justified.
Having done for or marked by a good or legitimate reason.
Okay?
Show or prove to be right or reasonable.
Reasonable. I'm going to tell you why that word is actually important. So do you remember one of the things that Sid tried to mention to you is the categorical imperative? You know what that is? It means that if my intentions are pure, you should focus on my intentions, not the results. Right? Does that make sense? Because LD debate is meant to be a value debate, right? We're not supposed to be debating nuclear war and overpopulation and the budget deficit from anything that happens in LD. We're not supposed to. That's the distinction between LD and policy. It's supposed to be policies on the numbers that, hey, we're going to divert money from spending to AIDS treatments, and now we're going to shift it to your program because that's where they're going to cut the budget, right? So now people are going to die of AIDS. Right? Does that make sense? That's a policy debate, right? But the Lincoln-Douglas debate is supposed to be a values debate. Like, is the idea on its face, prima facie, at first glance. Have you ever heard that term? Prima facie?
Doesn't sound English. But
It's Latin. So that's... Prima facie means at first glance. So LD is supposed to be a prima facie debate at its heart, that it's not supposed to go into the nitty gritty of political impacts, right? It's supposed to be discussion of our values and our reasons for those values, right? Prima facie, P-R-I-M-A-F-A-C-I-A, prima facie. So that being said, justified can be a reason that you can limit out. Like, you could use as an affirmative, if the negative wants to uphold, they should be, if they want to negate it, the negative can use utilitarianism. Right? What is utilitarianism? What does utility mean?
how do you spell utilitarianism?
I'm going to try to spell it here. Just always remember my
Utilitar.
Utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism, the doctrine that actions are rights if they are useful or for the benefit of a majority.
Exactly. So the word justified says if it's reasonable and
Or insofar.
the reason is good. That implies that I don't have to get into a utilitarian debate.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? So as an affirmative, you don't want to get into a debate on consequences. Like, especially if they start saying, well, what if Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was not a president during World War II? We wouldn't have had strong leadership to guide us through World War II, right? So we would have lost to the Germans without FDR, right? That would have been an argument, right? But that's a utilitarian argument. Because you cannot predict, and it is unfair to put the burden of would the next president in this hypothetical have been as strong as FDR, right?
Mhm.
It's your assertion, and that's not, and so justified is at first glance, it sets the debate at on our values, is our ideas better for society?
Mhm.
Not based on some ambiguous consequence we can't predict.
So you would need like an actual study proving that something like that would happen, like historical evidence that would happen.
I mean, in theory, that would be the only thing. Like you'd have to say that when this is done, like that example I told you about diversity, right?
Yeah.
That it's hurt because historically what happens is there's a backlash in society, right?
Mhm.
Now, that's one way to prove that, but the word justified to me indicates that if it's reasonable, if the judge at the end of the day finds the value and the goal of term limits to be reasonable, they should vote affirmative,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
If they do not find it to be reasonable, then they should vote against the idea. That's a simple way to redefine the resolution, right?
Mhm.
Your role as a judge is to say, if you think that term limits are a reasonable goal for our country because we value democracy through the criteria of egalitarianism, right? That everyone should equally participate politically, right? Political egalitarianism, everyone should be able to participate, right? And incumbency kills that. If you believe that premise is true, that it hurts it, then you would support term limits. Do not let the negative come here and tell you stories about wars or anecdotal evidence about leadership situations, crises, because that's not fair. You know? Your burden here is to determine the morality of the idea. Does that make sense? People are going to try to mix this debate into utilitarian debates. I don't know about this topic, but they try to turn LD into policy debates, right? Even Sid said they try to turn it to consequence debates, right?
Mhm.
Your goal is to keep it away from that. Does that make sense?
So basically, don't let people talk about hypotheticals.
Try to avoid it. Use the word justified and try to tell them that as they conceded the definition, the debate is being defined by a moral obligation, not a reasonableness test, you know? And these causal links that have very hypothetical links to it should not be evaluated because, perfect example, did the world end on the year 2000? Everybody predicted it.
People-
Computers were all gonna go crazy and we're all gonna blow ourselves up. Did it happen?
people said this.
Because binary code supposedly could only go to 1999, and it wasn't set up to switch to 2000. And so all the world was gonna, all these airlines were gonna go down, and computers were gonna crash, and all chaos.
Oh, yeah.
People started building bunkers for it. You guys are proof that it didn't happen,
The world was supposed to end up 2011.
huh?
The world was supposed to end up 2011.
And then Nostradamus and people said that those type of predictions, right? But with the Y2K, that these kind of terms have been done. So your argument is to avoid that utilitarian debate on term limits, if you're affirmative. Keep it on the morality if you can. Limit it to the ideas of diversity. If you're saying corruption, is there any other reasons you guys believe that it's strong for term limits besides corruption and diversity? And that's okay if you don't have it, because maybe other people are struggling to come up with other reasons too.
But then if we can shoot down the fair reason, then at least we can have our contextual.
Yeah.
I do have to leave at 5:30 because I have guitar lessons. But
So yeah, since we're about to leave or whatever, and you guys are gonna leave, let's talk about next week, next Friday, you guys are off.
yeah.
So this is gonna suck for you guys. I've sent this format of the thing, intro, resolution, definition. You're gonna have 2 contentions, usually with a couple of subpoints. You're gonna have
So is it like the same format as you would make a case for public forum? Like you would start off
Sort
with,
of, yeah.
We negate resolution, we resolve, we, affirm
affirm.
resolution.
Yeah, but the intro should be oratorical
Yeah.
of something, you know?
Mhm.
Because you really are trying to win the logic debate in this thing.
Mhm.
So I want you guys to work on an introduction. My suggestion is on this topic of term limits, I would pick a quote from somebody famous and use that context of why they're talking about it as your introduction.
John, do you want us to do like a group? Google
Yeah, you
Doc?
guys want to do a group? Yeah.
Here, I
Yeah.
made a Google Doc about one.
We already have a Word and a Google Doc.
So
Anyway, do you have a Google Doc?
So yeah, and then so next week, what is your game plan, guys? Do you guys want to meet? I'll meet because I want to see like.
Where do we meet?
That's the thing. I'll meet or we can do a Zoom, but the thing is that you guys won't get a chance to practice. I think it'll be hard to practice over Zoom.
Because I don't think a library would work since
Well,
No, because you
No,
can
it depends
rent
on
out a
the
room.
library.
You can rent those conference rooms. They sometimes have like HOA meetings and stuff like that in little conference rooms.
This isn't funded very much.
Hmm?
This isn't a very much funded activity.
This is not a fun activity?
No, it's not
Funded.
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 Well
Yeah, it's
funded.
low funded. So,
Low funded.
Yeah, so, no, I get it. No, trust me. I worked in a public school with very little funds for a debate team, so I get it.
I'll figure out the logistics.
If you guys can figure out if you guys want to meet, how many of you would be willing to meet on next Friday?
Meet on
depends
where?
on the time.
So tell me, would you guys, are you guys already have plans for the, I didn't even realize we were off that day. So did you guys build a bunch of plans for next Friday?
No.
I have no
I
idea.
can come,
Some,
but
but matters
where?
on the time.
So my point is that could we meet earlier, like 2 or 3 to 5:30 or 6 like that? Because you guys are gonna need some time. I know you guys have a lot of things to do, but if you guys wanna try, we're gonna have to get together eventually, see cases, right?
Where do we
Oh,
meet?
wait,
Well,
Yeah, I'll figure it out.
she's gonna help us figure that out, and we'll try to do it that way. Okay? The second thing is that, how many of you guys can read 3 to 4 articles on each side? Like, you have a week. If you can't do this, debate's gonna really be hard for you guys.